our panel today, starting down on the end, is Jill Thompson, the Eisner Award-winning creator.
Now this is my Clark Kent, and now I'm Jill Thompson.
That's right.
There you go.
I know her books, Wonder Woman, through Amazon. She's the creator of Scary Godmother. Next to her is Philip Tan, creator of DC's Curse of Brimstone. Might have also seen him recently on Dark Knights of the Drowned as part of the Metal crossovers.
Dark.
Dark Knight, there's only one issue.
Oh, yes. And then next to him, Aaron Lopriesti, recently an artist on Wonder Woman Conan.
Oh.
He's done quite a bit of Wonder Woman, actually, with Gail Simone and other writers, and also worked on recently Future Quest Presents.
That's right, Herculoids.
Yeah, I love all the future ones.
They're like, what's that?
So yeah, they're going to be doing some drawing today up here on the stage.
Anymore. It's so old.
Some of which you will see here on the board. But first, let's sort of get a general idea for people who want to break into the industry, kind of get your secret origin stories. Aaron, what was your first job? How did you get into this industry?
Well, I did a little bit of overkill. I did a 22-page Spider-Man story that I wrote. I didn't fill any of the dialogue or anything, but I came up with a story and did a 22-page story and took it to San Diego and showed it to Terry Cavanaugh, who was the editor at Marvel on Marvel Comics Presents. And they were using a lot of new people because it was an anthology book, so they had a lot of opportunities for to try new people out on little 8-page stories or whatever to back up the Wolverine feature. And so he said to me, like he probably said to many people that day, oh, I might be able to use you down the line. So I took that as I have a job. So I started calling, and this is before we had, email and stuff. So I actually had to use a phone, and I may even have had to rotary dial. I can't remember, but this would have been.
Oh, I love the phone.
This would have been. This would have been the late '80s, early, like 1990, 89, 90, somewhere in that neighborhood. And what I ended up having to do was travel to New York and go sneak into the offices at Marvel with my portfolio. I befriended the lady there that was the receptionist at the desk, and she, after a while, started sneaking me in when I didn't have any appointment. And so she just buzzed me in and looked the other way, and I'd walk in and then start just like wandering around the offices until I found Terry Cavanaugh's office, and he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, remember you said you'd hire me in San Diego? So I just was really annoying for a while until they actually gave me my first job, which was like the Spider-Man backup in Marvel Comics Presents, which was just horrific, so please don't go look it up. But
I'm picking that one.
Yeah,
I'm going to look for it now.
They keep showing up at my table, and I'm like begrudgingly inking it or signing it. But and after I did that, I was like, I'm in, right?
Right.
No. I couldn't get arrested after that, and so it was just this series of going back to New York every 6 months with my portfolio, and half the time not having appointments. But since I knew the receptionist, she kept sneaking me in. And finally, I started doing stuff for Marvel's What The, which was a humor title that they had back in that period of time. So I was writing and drawing Forbish Man stories, and it got me in the Marvel offices enough that I was able to eventually pick up some regular work at that point. And of course, I jumped over to Malibu Ultraverse, then back to Marvel, and all over the place. But 25 years later, I'm finally making a living doing it. And there's way more details, but I'm already, I'm boring myself at this point, so I'll just, you can fill in the blanks.
It's crazy thinking about that, because when I was a kid, I thought I'd have to go to college in New York so I could get a job at Marvel or DC. But these days, if you showed up at our offices in DC, you'd probably never get in.
If you have internet access, you can get your stuff seen.
Philip, I'm pretty sure your story probably involves ramen and Dan DiDio or something.
No.
That's just how you stay in comics?
Yeah.
You bribe us with ramen? Oh.
Now, I grew up in the Philippines, and there really wasn't internet back then. There were no conventions that we can go to. There were no officers or editor or receptionists that we can befriend. But Will Sportaggio back then, and his business partner Brian Heberlin, who also created Witchblade. I don't know if you guys know him, and Michael Turner created Witchblade for Image back then. They set up a studio back in the Philippines, and I can't even get into the studio. I just kind of befriended some of the artists, not the receptionists, by the way, some of the artists, and
It's all who you know.
Yeah. It's all who you know. Yeah. So I was hanging out for a year and can't get any breaks, and finally decided I'm gonna put my own story together. And Brian Heberlin at that point showed it to John Neen, who is now publisher of Marvel, but back then he was running Wildstar. And they picked it up, and that was my first break in comic books.
Yeah. And Jill, I don't remember if this was your first job, but I know the first thing I saw about you was Fathom at Kamiko, the Elemental spinoff.
That was not my very first job, but it was one of my first jobs. My story is kind of interesting. When I first started going to comic conventions, I was the only girl at the comic conventions, but the comic conventions were held in a room this big,
Right.
maybe.
Right.
It was like a hotel ballroom that had like that plastic wall you could pull across, and they had artists in the area that was in the corner with no light whatsoever. But John Byrne was a guest at one of these tiny conventions, and he was my favorite artist. So I convinced my father to bring me downtown to Chicago at the Americana Congress on Michigan Avenue, where he dropped me off in the front as a 13-year-old girl in a room full of like 45-year-old guys and a bunch of rotting comics, and said, I'm going to go find a place to park, and you'll be out here at 4 o'clock, and I'm going to listen to the ball game in the car. And he gave me pocket money, and I went in there and thought it was the most wonderful thing I'd ever been to in my entire life, because it smelled like old paper and books. Yeah. And I watched John Byrne draw for people all day and tell dudes that wanted racy sketches that they were perverts. In that way that John Byrne only can cut a person down. So that was my first foray into comics, but I got encouragement from Terry Austin, who was also there, and then I met Bill Reinhold, and I showed him all my artwork, and he started pointing out mistakes that I had made. And I went home and fixed those mistakes, and he recommended that I go to art school, which I did. And while I was in art school, I started sending my portfolio around to places like First Comics, which was local in Chicago. And I got my very first job doing a Munden's Bar backup. Well, that's my first professional job. While I was still trolling around comic conventions, I ended up doing some work for a very tiny company called Just Imagine Comics and Stories. So actually, my very first work was when I was like 15, and I did a comic called Banana Man. And it was just a series of bad banana jokes about a guy that, like, he was a superhero, but he had this giant inflatable banana head. And the very best one that I did, even though it's awful art, it was a parody of Superman 2, where he fought three fruits of equal or greater ability. It was nice pear, she was a girl, sour grapes, and rotten apple. And it was pretty funny. But Jack Herman wrote it, and then because I was the only girl at the comic convention, I went around, I drew it while I worked for a retailer, and then I went around to people in Artist Alley, and all the pros inked a panel for me.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, my first convention was like 1986, and it was in a hotel ballroom. Howard Chaykin, John Romita Jr., Joe Duffy were the only guests. I spent most of the day listening to Chaykin insult people. But I brought one-page printout, typed up, single space, of an idea I had for an event story, and Joe Duffy graciously read the thing and pointed out like how I'd done it all wrong, including not telling the editor who the characters were because it was a mystery, which is a common mistake. But yeah, it was weird back then how easy that access was and how small these things were.
but once I went to that convention, I started making friends with Bill Reinhold, who is like a brother to me. I eventually started setting up at convention, and when I went to art school, I was taking life drawing and painting and everything and trying to get better. And while I was doing that, I would send stuff off to companies, and I started to get work for First Comics. And when I got work for First Comics, then you could send, you didn't even have to look at your portfolio. You could show that you've been published. It's
Right.
kind of like your resume, that someone else took a chance on you first, and kind of worked my way up until I ended up drawing Wonder Woman for Karen Berger, and then Sandman, and then Vertigo started, and the rest is history.
So Philip, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Curse of Brimstone,
All right.
which is something you co-created. You want to show people like how to draw Curse of Brimstone, talk a little bit how you approach designing characters.
That was actually one of the most important part when we were trying to come up with Brimstone, is we wanted him to be someone that's relatively easy to draw, someone where, you know, if a kid becomes a fan of Brimstone, hopefully he'll be a lot easier to draw than, say, you know, Spider-Man with all the webs in his face, or you know, all these other characters. So,
You sure that wasn't just a deadline thing?
yes, that too.
So you can draw them faster?
Comes out.
Sometimes when you are drawing things, you realize somebody designed this for a
You all right?
pinup, you know, like
Right.
one time from the front, and then when you have to draw it, you know, like somebody fighting or flying or
Right.
or running down the street, you're like, how the heck do these weird metal bands run around there? Or
Oh, totally,
how does he run
yeah,
with these
yeah.
pouches between his legs or
Right.
whatnot? It
It's
looks
this-
cool when his legs are all spread apart, but that's impossible.
Yeah.
I have to make this happen for 25 pages. you
It's
know?
the spikes on the shoulder pads that kill me, because as soon as they raise their arms, they've just impaled themselves through their head. So it's like, yeah.
So we wanted to make it really easy to draw, of course with deadlines in mind.
Right.
But you know, but you know, you want it to be cool, and I think every artist who's gonna, you know, draw him, and because you don't know if you know, it's a book for DC, you don't know if eventually it's gonna cross with another character, it's gonna be in another book, or you know, it's gonna be drawn by someone as a pinup. Then that other artists are hopefully not going to have to worry about the spikes and the pouches on the legs, right?
Or
Yeah.
I love George Perez dearly, but Jericho from the Teen Titans, all those roughly arms from his costume, and then his vest thing had like all this pattern on it, and I was like, oh man, like that's tough.
Well, anybody that designs a character should be required to draw it like at least 20 times before they turn in their designs, because I think it's the easiest thing in the world is to sit there and draw one time and just start adding stuff and adding stuff.
Because it looks cool.
Right, but then you got to draw it from all these different angles 100 different times in a comic, and so yeah, that's when you start appreciating Silver Age Gil Kane designs.
Yeah. No, I don't think I can flip this because it's upside down.
Fletch nose.
Way to
I
go,
think, is it upside
Fletcher.
down for you, or is it upside down?
Maybe we can just unplug it. No, we can't.
Well, is it upside? It's upside down. Oh, so they don't see
Yeah.
it. Oh.
Yeah. Okay, I guess it's time to demonstrate my skill of drawing upside down.
Well, stand in front of it now.
Is there any?
Perch on the edge.
Someone's got us back
Oh,
there.
there you go.
Oh, it's a.
Technology.
So you know,
It's
you
a
can
buttons.
actually twist this, I guess.
No, there was a button that just I think said reverse, so he did it.
Okay.
Simple
Thanks, Fletch.
solution.
That happens if you grow up with no internet and no other, you know, all these other things.
Hey, I still don't, man. I don't.
You
don't-
my TV.
You know what's funny about this thing? It's an Elmo, and I remember the first time I saw one of these, it was like a giant overhead projector, and it had like you had this big apparatus that came over the top. I would do talks at libraries or book sellers conferences, and I would draw in front of it, and I was like, gosh, I wish I could get one of these things. And now it can fold up and fit in my purse. I might have to get one of those for Artist Alley.
Well, anyway, going back to Brimstone. So what I really wanted to make sure that the characters, you know, that you're still going to see the eyes. I think, regardless if it's a monster or there's, you know, a lot of designs on the face or patterns or anything on the character's head, it's still pretty important to have the eyes, because that's where a lot of the emotions are being conveyed, and you can kind of tell the situation without having word balloons, you know, as long as the eyes can tell you, you know, what's going on. And the lazy part of me just wanted to make sure that there's no nose, there's no mouth, there's no hair, there's no anything else, and the whole, you know, it's Brimstone. The character's powers are burning, ashes, and all these other things. So, you know, it gives a lot of freedom to other artists who's going to take it, that, you know, you're going to give him fire features, you know, and it's more fun for other artists to do their interpretations and draw it. So basically, Brimstone would be this head with very easily seen eyes, and then, you know, just however the artist wants to interpret the fire. I did add it eventually, some of the, because then it's going to be a Human Torch if I don't add anything else, right? So I added,
Right.
you know, there's a few small patterns on his face, and that would be it. That would be Brimstone. Initially, you know, I wanted him to be a monster. You know, even having the expressive eyes, I want him to be a monster. You know, and I did this, and Dan immediately got back to me and says, no. No, but that really was how he initially, you know, would look like. And you know how it kind of looks like the 80s cartoons where monsters all had this really obvious jagged, you know, no
Not even
mouth,
teeth.
just the teeth and the mouth were all kind of combined into one. So and see, that's why it's easy, because when you get a no from Dan, then you can just black it out and make sure that oh no teeth, Dan. It's now going to be approved.
Make a good lucha mask.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think what's important with characters, like I said earlier, that, you know, the eyes needs to convey a lot of the emotions, the feelings, with or without dialogue. So the whole area around the face, where you can kind of have the feeling of how the eyebrow area part is gonna go, because that also helps express. I would want to leave that open, and everything else would be deadline friendly. So.
Thank you for making me understand why I've been late on things. Because I draw all the things.
And obviously, you cannot have a comic book with no Kirby crackles.
That's right.
Yeah. So to kind of make it different, because his fire is not the same as other kind of fire.
I wish there was fire with curry crackle.
Right.
Like, there should be some kind of way to make that
Like a screen
a
tone.
special effect.
We should have had like Kirby Crackle Zipatone back in the day.
Right,
Just
right.
Yeah, right.
And basically, that's Brimstone.
Okay. And are you all pen and paper these days? Do you do digital?
Now, I love being able to get mad when my ink, you know, splatters on the wrong parts of the paper and have to come back and fix it. No, like.
You can't do that digitally. You have to do it manually to really frustrate yourself.
If anything else, I think what a lot of artists might miss, you know, especially if you're a digital artist. I'm sure every artist, you know, from the 80s, 90s, anyone who's traditional has to have talked about happy accidents.
Yes.
And those things are the randomness of them makes the style, in my opinion. You know, it gives you that look. It gives you that accident that created all these amazing comic books that you know we love. And if everything is so precise, everything is controlled, and you can always undo, then you don't have that.
Jill, you paint your pages, so do you agree with that? Do you
Well, I was
enjoy the
gonna-
happy accidents? Or?
There's happy accidents and then there's unhappy accidents.
Most of mine are unhappy, unfortunately.
But I've seemed to
Whiteout.
make them work. Oh, well, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to paint something, and when I go to paint it, I have a page that's almost done, and I'm on black or indigo or something where I'm doing some dark thing, and I do this, and for some magical reason, my brush flips down, my thumb rolls off, rolls down the page, and I'm like, and it has a big like indigo stained line. I'm like, oh my God. And you can lift watercolor with fresh water sometimes, but that's not a color that you can do it in.
Right.
And there has been a panel of something where suddenly everything in the foreground became in shadow immediately, where I put a dark blue wash over everything, and then everything else receded in the background because it was a big, bad accident.
Right.
That's when you go in and says, it's a collaboration with Brian Stelfreeze.
I mean, it worked.
Which I love, you know.
But,
that's-
yeah, if I make a mistake, it's either I have to figure out a way to fix it, there's no undo, or I have to cut out a panel and redo a panel, which is okay, because you've had to do that in the past with pen and ink before. It's a more laborious process, but I like the satisfaction of having something tangible at the end of the day.
Gotcha.
Also, I don't.
Did you want to show you?
I will.
So that's the swap. So Jill can show you her process.
Yeah, I think that I've often talked to younger editors about that, of missing the old days where you wouldn't actually see most of the comic book pages until you got a giant FedEx box full of them.
Like a present.
Yeah.
Right?
Frank Miller used to send complete issues to Dark Horse of Sin City, and that's the first time you'd see him pull them out of the box and read it. Giant boards, and it's a totally different experience.
Did you call him back and says, oh, it's missing one? Just don't tell him it's in your garage.
I wouldn't have done that.
Apparently, it's in Marv Wolfman's basement. He's got a lot of interesting things in his basement, I found out.
You also knew which artists were smokers because the
Right, I was
pages-
just going to say, I just had a conversation with somebody. You could find out so much about the artist when the pages used to show up in FedEx boxes. You open it up and the smell.
Wow.
Yeah. All the
I
notes.
did not know that.
All the notes they'd do, like who they talked to that day, like they'd write people's phone numbers in the
gosh.
margins.
I just-
True, I do have all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah,
written on.
I just found some pages. I was going through my flat files and it had like, take your daughter to dance at 3, and I'm like, it's right off to the side of the panel.
Here I've got a Wonder Woman, and right now I know that this surface is not necessarily the best for painting, but some people can do an amazing job on it, and I'm gonna try and do that right now. Also with, traditional pages, one of the things that I like is, I find that when people do stuff digitally, there are design rules that I like to follow where your eye can't focus on everything all the time, and because you can, pinch in and zoom in and out, you can delineate everything on the computer, which isn't the way your brain sees the world. Like if I'm focused on the people in the front row, your brain kind of makes the other stuff fuzz out. So there's color theory rules and design rules that happen based on how a focal point happens. And what I think, there's no depth of field sometimes in digital stuff. People learn, so if you're just learning how to draw comics and you want to draw things the best, it's there's a way to use the computer and the Wacom and Photoshop as a tool. You don't have to make everything as important as everything else. It all has to be well drawn, and it all has to make your eye flow to where the action is or where the important dialogue is, or something like that. But if you make everything as detailed as everything else, it's going to flatten out the entire page and not make your story go really well. And that kind of stuff can happen. Like if you notice, if you go back and look at Joe Kubert, Sergeant Rock, and you see if he does a crowd, there are all these little clothespin people. They look like clothespins, but they look like people if you think about it. Well, you don't even have to think about it because your brain says, "Oh, that's a crowd," but you can't see the features on everybody. Now, sometimes when I try and do that, it looks like, why are there a bunch of great big clothespins sitting in the audience? Because that was Joe's style. So if you're focused on Sergeant Rock, but then there are all these, casualties. He's making it look like a crowd without it being a crowd you're paying attention to, because you're paying attention to the thing that's the most important.
That also means somewhere some writer typed out Wonder Woman stands in front of a giant crowd,
I know.
crack their knuckles, and they're like, I'm done for the day.
Well, yeah, that's the easiest thing in the world to write is 10,000 troops came over the hill, and then you get to draw it, and you're like,
Damn it.
Yeah, Sean Murphy told us yesterday he's working on The Wake with Scott Snyder, and he got a script page that said, and then 1,000 mermaids emerged from the ocean. You're welcome. And he's like, no, thank you, no.
one mermaid and a bunch
What's
of
the
clothespins.
craziest thing that
Bunch
you've
of
ever
fish
had
down
a
clothespins.
writer ask you to do? Like, what's like the craziest thing you've ever had a writer think you could do? Like, that was just like
Well, that's
impossible.
That's a twofold story. I got a 20-page script from Jim Shooter that was over 60 pages long once, and yeah.
Is it like a 100-page novel, graphic novel?
I couldn't believe it. And I won't go any farther than that. But then when I was working on Planet Hulk, and I'm not going to, Greg did a terrific job on the script, but there's just scenes in there where Hulk is fighting armies.
Right.
And these are all dudes, and I mean, they're just not like, it's not like Planet of the Apes with a bunch of naked guys in loincloth. I mean, these are all people in armor, and that was brutal. And, but the one that sticks out was, it was very early in my career, I did a Robert E. Howard adaptation for Dark Horse. And Roy Thomas, he just basically lifted pages from whatever Robert E. Howard book, it was Bran McMorrin's story. Mm. And it was just, I mean, it was hundreds of troops come down over the hill. Bran McMorrin stands before, 60 Roman soldiers. It's just like, and that was just barely even, I don't even know if I'd call my work professional at the time. And it was a challenge. And I was afraid to go. I wasn't anybody who could go, I'm not drawing this.
Right.
I drew what I was told to draw, and it was brutal.
How about you, Philip? Have you ever gotten a nightmare script?
It's less about crowd or details. I actually enjoy drawing details. It's more the script that asks you, okay, so panel 4 of 5, and then you have the character that acts 6 actions.
Right.
Yes.
And so he would say, okay, this guy would, raise his arm, use his elbow to hit that wall, and punch the guy afterwards from the impact, And it's like, no, that's
panel
4
2.
panels.
Yeah.
And you have to still show that the guy got punched and he's in pain and all that. So it's hard when you're trying to deliver multiple actions in one single panel. And I think a lot of it's unfair to say writers, because there's a lot of great writers who understand how to deliver the medium for the artist, so the artist will, so the writer can go 50% and the artist can take the next 50% and give you magic. But when you have people who comes over and says, okay, in their head it's like a TV show, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't really understand how many panels would or how many frames would translate into one page, but these are the frames in my head. And conveniently, I would just fit that into panel 4.
Right.
So that would be the problem.
I think sometimes they see it as like a moving action, like on television.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
I've encountered scripts where they've said, it's an establishing shot. We see the main street of the town. Our main character is standing on the corner a few blocks away. He's looking at his watch. The time reads, we can't see what's on the watch of that character if we're in the back and seeing the entire town.
Right. No, absolutely.
But I think it's a crane shot that they see coming down towards.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like the first scene that they see.
But I think if like back in the days when Vertigo were experimenting a lot, those actually were a little possible. Because you can do like montages and all these other things where the guy's hand, the guy raising his hand with the time scene is maybe the background sky of him looking out the window or something. Right. So that might work back in that kind of style of story.
I do. I usually have a little travel hairdryer that I use, and also this paper isn't the best, but it's actually doing nice things. I like it. So I'm going to dry this off, and then I'll kind of ink the rest of it, because the way that I paint comics is like I fill in my pencil areas, and then I do go in with like a paint line that's the color, a darker color of whatever it is that I'm using. So it's not like I don't use a black ink line at all, unless it's something that I'm outlining that's black.
I've heard stories about artists from Hong Kong where they have someone with an iron by the studio, so it's
really?
Iron
because watercolor, bends the paper.
Right.
So someone is ready with a traditional iron, waiting for the papers to come in.
Did you guys ever read that story about Wrightson? It was he painted the cover to one of the Web of Horror comics, It was oil painting and had to get it to the printer, and he didn't know how to dry it fast. We stuck it in the oven. I guess it just.
Or I'm surprised it's made out of oil, so wouldn't it catch fire?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But according to the story, it just sort of like started bending up like this, and he was like, "Oh my gosh."
But that's probably gouache.
No, it was oil.
Oh, it's
Because
oil?
and maybe it wasn't hot enough to burst into flame. I don't know, but it was pretty funny.
So since Jill does her own colors, how about you guys? How much collaboration and contact do you have with your colorists?
I used to, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. What used to be, early in my career, the people that I was like, I always despised were inkers. I was like, those are the guys who are ruining the work if you don't get a good one. And now it's like, oh, it's those colorists who are ruining the comic if you don't get a good one. But I don't even, because I color my own covers, and so I just try and pick somebody that I kind of got an idea of what they're going to do, and I just let them do it. Because I've always found with inkers or colorists as well that people work in a style, and it's probably the same with artists or pencilers, is that people tend to work in a style that's really comfortable for them, and they do their best work working in that style. So if you try and push somebody in a direction one way or another that they're not comfortable with, you're going to get a bigger disaster than you would even if you don't necessarily like what they were doing to begin with. So I just kind of let people do their thing and hope for the best.
How
about you, Philip? Don't you color some of your stuff as well?
For fun, yes, but most of my work, it's I have a color partner that I enjoy working together with, and we do go back and forth a lot. It's kind of unfair to call him the colorist and just the colorist, and I'm just the artist, because he actually adds a lot to the art, and I add a lot to the colors. But if we're not working
really
together,
doing lots and lots.
was that?
Sorry, I'm saying so many colorists that I see nowadays are doing so much of the rendering.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's
Photoshop and stuff can do.
And that's the reason. I mean,
Beautiful.
like what Aaron was saying earlier. Sometimes if you don't communicate with your colors, you don't know what you're getting back, and if they don't enjoy what you want the book to look, they're going to force it, and they're going to force the style, and the product is not going to be to your liking. So, with that in mind, I would ask the colorist. So this is how I would render certain. I would, if I have to draw it or I have to color it myself, this is how the contours would go, and he would pick it up, and he would says, oh, this is where I want those colors to flow, so you would have to draw it this way. So in many ways, it's a real big collaborative effort. But if I'm working with another colorist that I never worked with, then like Aaron, I would just cross my fingers.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I try to work with people I know what I'm going to get so that there's not that sort of surprise. But the fact that I do my own coloring, like on covers and other things, it's like I would do things one way, and I know that this person, they should be allowed to have their own sort of artistic interpretation to a degree, and so that it works, hopefully well with what you've given them art-wise. And so, I could see myself really, someone sending colors and going, could you make that a little more blue, or could you, and just drive somebody nuts. So I just try not to do that, and like I said, hope for the best. And if an issue comes out and you look at it and go, oh, this isn't what I wanted at all, then you can kind of go back and go, hey, could you kind of go in this direction on the next issue, but keep it sort of in general terms rather than sort of nitpicking and trying to make them do what you would do, because that's not really fair to them either.
Yeah.
So.
No, I totally agree. I'm sorry, Jill, you were saying something.
It's not just a matter of someone being able to use Photoshop or whatever and fill in colors in a space, because they have to be just as much of an artist as the people that are penciling and or inking the comic.
Absolutely.
Because they're doing a lot of, delineating of the figure or creating the shadow, and they have to know anatomy and color theory, so they know what recedes and how to create a mood with stuff. And sometimes they add so much more to someone's actual, pencil and ink drawings, and it's incredible the way it looks when it's just penciled, and then when it's finished. I think it's really remarkable, the stuff that I've been seeing lately.
Yeah. I think the cover I did for the show, the Superman poster, if you guys notice the clouds in the background, I actually like drawing the clouds one by one, every single one of them.
Oh, that's nice.
And and my colorist would come back and says, you have to erase this part. And then I will draw in this part. So it means that he actually understands what I'm trying to get and understood that there's something I did wrong to reach my goal. So he's gonna fix it. You know, it's like, okay, if I follow everything you've drawn here, you're not gonna get what you want from me. Now, if you erase those and let me add these, then yeah, you're gonna get exactly what you're asking. So.
Well, I think Jill's correct. There's a lot more talented colorists in the business now than I think when this first went digital. It was just like anybody that knew how to use Photoshop was a colorist, and that's like you said. That's not without having the knowledge, the art knowledge, to do it correctly.
And there's only one brush too.
Right.
This airbrush. That's it.
Exactly. It looks like the side of a van from the 70s. But now there's some really good, artists that come in and just do some really incredible stuff. So it's not quite as frustrating as it was 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, whenever computer coloring came into.
We were talking before about what deadline-friendly design. You can tell by what I'm doing that Wonder Woman, the True Amazon, I did not have a deadline-friendly design, as I would change her magical hair every time I did it, because I thought, well, she's a princess, and but she's a warrior, so she needs it out of her face, but she needs it out of her face in a really fancy, expensive way. And because I'm consistently changing the color that I use to outline things, like inking, I'm constantly going back and dipping into my brush for blue or black or brown or a darker red, and that is so much more difficult than just having one black and white line on there. I'm sure if I did this digitally, there would be a way that this could be simplified, but that's a big learning curve for me. I would love to try it, but then I always think, well, then it wouldn't look like this at the end of the day. And
well, you don't have any art really then either at the end of the day. It's like all floating in cyberspace, and where's my painting,
And because someone's going to get this, then they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even miss them I miss now you used to be able to get original art with the lettering on it.
Yeah.
So you'd actually have a story page on your wall.
I just posted some of that on Instagram. I found some stuff that I did where the art was not only just, some was hand lettered, but some of it was pasted on overlay.
Right.
And it had all yellowed on on my art. And some of it I remember when they would do a stat, they wanted to change a panel or something, they would take a stat of it, and then they would wax.
No way.
I remember that process,
with the wax roller, and then put the stat right over the top of it.
See, I've always been told that the old glue that they use does yellow the paper.
It does that too.
And I'm not sure what you have to, what do you use now? If you want to do the same thing just for fun, what do you use? Because it's,
If you want to just
there are people who are going to commission you to recreate something, and sometimes you have to paste that title on it or something like that, right?
Well, I mean, I would hope you could hand letter, and it would.
Not everyone can be Arthur Adams.
Right, but hand lettering I think is so important because hand lettering is like it helps. Every time there's a word balloon on the page, it stops the flow of your eye and the silent storytelling that happens. So that word balloon almost has to be another character on the page, so it's so well incorporated that it helps you flow towards the most important action that you're seeing or has a lot of impact. And if you have people shouting, the lettering should look like shouting. And if you have whispering, the lettering should look like whispering. It's like, I love hand lettering. I love lettering in general. And I think it's such an integral part of comic book storytelling. It's not just a place to put lots and lots of dialogue. It's a place to put the most important thing that these people say, because the art's supposed to tell you what's going on, and you're supposed to, with acting, even though, like you mentioned, Brimstone doesn't have any mouth or nose, but you leave the eyes and the brow there so he can emote. Yeah. And then you have to do the rest of it with body language. So if he's like really upset, he has to be like, instead of, because you don't see his mouth.
Yeah.
And if there's tons of shouting all around him, it's like when he says something, it should have a lot of impact, and then the art should have the rest of the impact. You mentioned it 50-50.
Yeah.
It really is
absolutely
total 50-50 collaboration.
It's really nice. Have you done that before?
Actually, this is the best thing I've ever done on this type of paper. It usually doesn't look this nice, so now I can't get away with saying, oh, I can't do one of those. It doesn't look good on that paper.
We won't tell.
Yeah, but Fletcher made sure you got the right paper.
Well, I've noticed some artists like Brian Hurt and Mike Allred have gone towards doing their own sound effects now on the board and
You
making
mean it makes sound?
Yes, they make the noises as they draw.
You know, it's funny you should say that because I just finished
I'm
doing
gonna go over some air.
I'll swap with that.
Wonder Woman Conan, and there were some pages in there that I thought there should be some sound effects in, and it never ended up there. And a lot of times I will go in and write in my own sound effects as part of the artwork. My lettering used to be just horrific when it first started out, but over the years I've been able to sort of kind of figure out at least, you know, title writing and sound effect lettering so it looks okay. But it's really cool when you can incorporate that into your actual drawing and it becomes part of the drawing. Even though most of the time you're not going to get your balloons on the page, if you have your sound effects, that's something that makes it kind of vintage, but it also works as part of the art. Okay, I was doing I guess it was going to be a Wonder Woman. I don't want to copy Jill though now, but it could be anybody, I suppose. But one of the things I do, I don't know if you guys can, there we go.
You're pretty good.
One of the things I like to do with my figures is, even if someone's just standing there, you can see I've got like this curve in her, and this is not about being sexy or something, because I do this with my male characters as well. But even when they're just standing there, I try to get a sense of energy or movement in the character, so they're not just, to me, there's nothing more boring than having someone stand here straight, you know, up and down, frontal view. You know, if I do that with a guy or even a female character, I'm probably going to have the weight shifted one way or another, you know, so that there's some sense of energy in that figure. Yeah, and people are not boards, you know, like this. There are shifting weight and things like that. So that's something I always try to incorporate into my figures, because we do have more standing around in comics than we used to. Although we're starting to get away from that again, which is good. But yeah, just in terms of basic drawing and how I do this, anybody that's opened up you know, how to draw book, you'll see the sort of, you know, create the egg shape for the head, and you put that line there where the eyes are going to be in the line that establishes where the middle of the face is. And I still do that now. Most all the time I do my drawing, I don't do it in regular pencil like this. I'll do it in, I don't use a non-photo blue because it's too waxy and it's too light, and you have to push too hard, and then you got like these crevices in the paper. What I use is a coal erase, a light blue pencil, and because it erases, whereas the non-photo blue really doesn't because it's so stinking waxy. But the coal erase has like built-in erasers on the pencils to erase the line. As long as you don't press too hard, they erase pretty easily. But the thing with the blue line is you can actually, when you go into Photoshop and you scan this, you can drop the blue out. So it just totally disappears. So I can do all my underdrawing, this line work here on the egg shape of her face, in blue, and I do not have to erase it. I don't have to clean it up, because I can just, or I should say the inker, if I'm not inking, the inker can then go in and get rid of that. And so if I'm doing this all in pencil, I got to go in and erase that, and then, oops, I erased her nose, so now I got to redraw her nose, right? But if I do that with a blue pencil, and this all started with what we were talking about earlier about deadlines and saving time, is I can go in then and do my underdrawing, and I'm not erasing anything. Okay, so I've got this underdrawing with all my, and I can blow through that pretty quickly, where I just will go through and lay out my page in blue, and I have these rough figures that they're more than stick figures. They're sort of like quick outlines of the body, kind of what I've got here, but I do that in blue, and I do it relatively quickly, and I do the whole page, right? So I break my panels down, and then I go back in with my pencil and just draw over the top of it. And because I have that blue structure underneath, even if my drawing changes radically, I'm still not erasing anywhere near as much, because I'm not using my pencil to kind of figure out the form. I've already done that in blue, so I'm using that as my guide, and then I just kind of go over it with a pencil and maybe put the muscles in or make a shift here or there. But it's a much quicker process to getting your page completed than if I was doing all this in pencil and had to keep going back in and see like, oh, that mouth's not right. Go in and erasing, because inevitably you're erasing something that you don't want to erase along with something you do want to erase, which then makes you redraw everything again.
So are you saying that then you do this and you scan it in and then your inks digitally?
No, after they ink the page, they can go in then after they scan it for the colors,
Okay.
right? Then they can drop the blue out, and then you just have your black line work left. And
I wasn't sure if you were then left with like pristine pencil pages, or someone else inked them, or someone else's process was completely digital after
Well,
you.
that's actually something that's getting more frequent now. There are people who sends their penciled artwork and the inker would just print them out in blue line,
Right.
and just draw them.
Now
ink
I
them.
have to find out what printer they're using.
And some of them still even have to go to like the Kinko's.
Yeah, because can you get that the paper, the
Yeah.
right paper, like going through your printer?
I've got
A lot of the printers now, you can actually feed the DC boards in.
Yeah,
Really?
I've got an Epson 2800. It's pretty high end.
Yeah.
It's probably
Is that one of those? They're about this tall.
no, it's
No, it's-
Tabletop one, but they have like.
yeah, it's table.
Well, I
it's
have the
about this
old.
wide.
I have the oldest one that
Yeah.
was able to do the first. Well, actually, I don't have it anymore. But the oldest one, was it the 2800? There's something. There's one older than that, but you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, I had
you
the
can.
old one too,
Yeah,
but
you
it
can
died
actually.
finally.
You can actually just feed the whole board.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't get coverboard anymore from DC. I buy the paper at the art store, 11 by 17. But I got the template in blue on my computer, and so then I just put the paper in and I print the cover board on this paper that I want to use, and it holds up fine. And that's
And then you send that to your inker, or you
yeah,
ink it
or ink
yourself.
it myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a funny thing the other day where I won't say who they are so no one can figure out the system, but the inker and the colorist live near each other. And they get in and there's a message from the inker that says, oh, I left the artboard on your porch this morning, so when you wake up, you should be able to find it, and so you can scan it and color it. And I was just like, what kind of process is this?
It sounds like my UPS driver sometimes.
Sounds like
It's
he
like,
lives
you
where I
left
grew
something
up.
out on the stairs?
There's no
Are you
internet.
crazy? It's raining.
Yeah. I hope the porch is covered, right?
Look at you with the memorization of that new costume belty thing. I always get the breastplate messed up.
Well, that's what keeps changing, So this is the
I like
breastplate
that
that I used when I did it, it was like 7 years ago when I was on Wonder Woman, and so I just, I figure.
But I think with
probably
Wonder Woman, the breastplate is actually, I think DC is much more forgiving because people do want to see different kinds of interpretation of that breastplate, and it's fun to see Jill's version, to see Aaron's version. If I ever draw a Wonder Woman, people like to see different things, and that's kind of cool.
With Batman, it seems to be the belt.
Yeah,
Like
because
someone's
it
always-
was never
No
the
idea
same.
what's going on.
It was
Someone's
never
always
the
putting stuff like Lee Weeks keeps drawing him with these big bulky things on his belt. That's not really the design
I
anymore.
do too. I like David Mazzucchelli version. I kind of
Right.
like, my favorite Batman is he just has a gray sweatshirt and he's sharpied on a bat and he's got a weirdly homemade stitched leather helmet that kind of looks like 1920s football helmet with bat ears and big combat boots and then an army belt, and then he beats people up and gets the crap beat out of him. To me,
Makes
it's
more sense, actually.
super rugged Batman.
So I think we have about 10 minutes left. Is there any questions from the audience? Anything you guys would like to know from these fine artists? Sure, back there.
It looks like she has the angel of the devil on her shoulder.
I've used a lot of different types of paper over the years. The best paper I've ever had, Alex Ross used to work on this stuff called scanner board, because back before there was flat scanners at the printers, there were these giant drum scanners, and if you did something on an illustration board or a watercolor board, there would be some guy with a razor blade slicing the paper portion off of the hard cardboard portion. And so Strathmore created this quick release board where it would stick to the board and it had like a thin backing, you could peel it off like a big sticker. That stuff was great. But as the printing process became different, they stopped making that. And when Alex had done a bunch of stuff, he didn't like how paint adhered to that surface because he doesn't like when you see brushstrokes on things. But I don't mind if you see the effect of watercolor on stuff. So he gave me all the rest of his, but then they discontinued it. So we were both scrambling to find something else to use. And watercolor board is very heavy and big and expensive. Then I was using Strathmore, like the kid finish paper that people use, but a 5-ply, so it was almost like a board. And I would tape that down a little, and it had a really nice surface, but they changed the formula of that paper. So now I use 2 different types of watercolor paper. One is a Strathmore Holbein.
Is that a 500-pound one?
No, it's I think it's like a 400-pound. It comes in a big black, like a black booklet, but they do 14 by 16, so it fits comic size on it. It's a little more cream colored than I would like, but it's $75 for 12 sheets. So I found a different brand that sells 12 by 16, which is much more suited to comics, and it's really nice paper, a lot more affordable than that. It's called Fluid. So I use that currently for all the stuff that I use. And then on occasion, I'll use watercolor board for covers and stuff like that. But if I'm going to do something that has a lot of pages, I need to do something that is not so expensive, but really good.
I use for just the comic book pages now. We used to get the paper from like Marvel would have their own paper, DC would have, but years ago DC's paper got, I don't know, they
Really
switched
bad.
something out
They were
really,
really
really bad. And so
I just got a huge bunch of it, and I was liking what it was.
Well, I
It's a lot
haven't used
better
any of
now,
theirs
yeah.
for like probably 5 years now, so I don't know, maybe they've
Literally,
improved it
yeah.
again. But
Years
I buy these Strathmore pads that are actually have you seen the comic book
Yeah,
pages?
the one with the dinosaur in front. Yeah.
Okay, I use the dinosaur for when I do like commissions, right? Because it's a thinner paper. Then there's the one with the little blonde girl, superhero girl that kind of looks like.
I don't know.
And I think it's either 2 or I think it's 300 series, but it has like the blue line on it, and that's pretty good paper, and it takes the ink pretty well. And I use that for doing my pages, and it has the blue line already on there for the pages. And then there's this blank stuff that's heavier that has the superhero guy on it with, you know, there's the 3 kinds: the dinosaur, the girl, superhero, and then the male superhero. And the male superhero is a heavier paper with a little bit of tooth to it. And so when I ink my own stuff, I use that. It's more expensive, but that's the one I run through my printer and print the blue lines on. But the great thing about it is it has a little bit of tooth to it, so it absorbs the ink better. So when you erase your pencil, you know when you erase your pencil and the ink goes gray and you're like, oh, I can't even scan this now. It really doesn't do that on this paper because...
Shiny ones, yeah.
Yeah, the
shiny
slicker
surface,
stuff does, yeah. But this has a little tooth to it, and it absorbs the ink really well, so you can erase over the top of it, and it doesn't kill your black inks.
These are analog problems.
Well, I
All my students were like, we don't have the problem, Jill. And I was like, but you should have this problem because it helps you like overcome other problems. Like
but see, I actually I love there's a paper that the leader makes, but it's only available in Japan, and it's actually glossy, but it does not smear at all, and it can you can probably take up to 4 ply of 4 applications of water wash before it starts to bend.
Really?
It's amazing.
How does the
So how do you get it?
You have to go.
Right,
Japan has this bookstore called Sekaido,
nerding out about like materials?
and you can't even order it online.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
I've yet
it's
to be-
pretty amazing. I mean, they are so into, you know, comic book create. I mean, obviously they're
Right.
known for their mangas and whatnot, and they're so into it that they really goes out of their way to make superhero paper, like things where
Oh my gosh.
you know you don't do. We're worried about paper bending, so we're going to compromise on something else. While for them, it's like, I need to figure out how to do both of them together, you know, so.
Buy my comics, make me rich, because I have to go to Japan and buy paper.
I know, exactly. Next person that goes to Japan is like, okay, you got to get paper for me, you're going to come back with this.
Are you going to the Magic Comic Artist store so you can
Actually,
buy the papers to put on Amazon?
I was actually telling Rich the other day that it's more expensive for me to fly from LA to New York and book a hotel than LA to Japan to Tokyo and book a hotel. Like, it's cheaper to do that.
So maybe a paper run.
Okay, so you're going. Take
Here-
me with you.
Here's one more question down here.
Better lately than I have in the recent past.
You know, this is really dating myself, but I was like 12 when How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way came out, and How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and one of the things that they stressed in there about everything else was, you know, meeting deadlines, and I had heard the thing, you know, you got to do a page a day. So at 12 years old, when I was doing comic book pages, I started practicing getting it done in a day. You know, instead of spending an entire week on a page and making everything just perfect, I was like, that was part of my training ritual, was getting it done as well as doing as good a job as I could. And so I find it actually pretty easy. What challenges me is splash pages and double page spreads. I almost to a point where I hate doing them because they require you to slow down, and because they really mean something, right? So you really have to take your time and make the thing pay off, which then stretches into a couple days or whatever. Whereas doing a panel page, and it depends also how adept you are at storytelling too, visually storytelling. If it's something that comes to you easy, you know, it's easy to lay out a page so that it makes sense, okay? And then you say, okay, do I have time to take it to the next level where I'm going, okay, this makes sense, but is it cool like Steranko, and it makes sense, you know, because that takes a little bit more time to then start doing it. And what I do is I do a basic, quick layout of my story, okay? What do I need to see so this page is clear? And it's not necessarily dynamic, it's not necessarily all that interesting, but it's kind of like TV directing, right? Close up, establishing shot, medium shot, thing like that. Then you look at it, okay, I've got all my elements for storytelling here, and I've done it relatively quickly, okay? Now I step back and go, okay, what can I do? Can I move these panels? I know the elements I have to have on this page for the storytelling. Now what can I do to make this more interesting, more artistic, make the design better? And then, and by working in that process, I find that I move fast enough that it's rare that I don't get a page done in a day. Okay, at least a panel page. But that also, for me, if I have to do backgrounds, buildings and stuff, that slows me down, because then you're establishing perspective and stuff. Right, and if you're doing the Avengers or Justice League, you've got 22 characters on a page, so I'm now drawing 22 figures instead of 6 if I'm doing Batman, right? So that'll also slow you down. But you figure out ways, as you do this a while, to, I hate to say cut corners, because I never want to compromise on the art.
Well, you're streamlining.
Yeah, exactly. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah, well, you figure out how to tell the story the best way possible, in the easiest way possible for you, the clearest way possible, most dynamic way to get it done so everybody enjoys it. You know, you're not noodling over something,
right,
but you're also not hacking it out.
Right. And you make sure that what you do finally decide to draw, that's the best you can do. Okay, so even though maybe you don't take the most difficult angle all the time that you're drawing from, that you know it's going to take me twice as long if I do this from a really dramatic low angle as if I just do a TV shot. But then if you do say, okay, I'm going to do a TV shot because I can get it done in time, I'm going to make sure those characters look the drawing is really, really good. So it's never a situation for me where I'm just hacking out the drawing to get it done. It's figuring out ways to do storytelling that maybe simplifies your process a little bit so that you can get it done.
And speaking of getting things done, we are running out of time.
I really want another hour to keep talking about this, because I think we all could add
get us more into paper and pens, and it'll go on forever. So we have 3 drawings up here. And if you guys don't mind, I'm going to do some trivia questions really quick so people can win these drawings.
Sure.
Since we've been doing a lot of Wonder Woman, I've thought of some Wonder Woman questions. Can anybody tell me what was the name of the comic where Wonder Woman first debuted?
It's too easy.
There? Correct.
I didn't know that.
So if you want to come get a drawing?
What's Wonder Woman, right?
I was going to go down the line.
Ah.
I couldn't think of a brimstone.
Okay. Because you don't know yet.
Yes. I thought of like what other characters make you think of Brimstone, but it was going to be like a lot of Marvel characters. Does anyone know the name of the creator of Wonder Woman? There you go. So if you want to come up.
Who got it?
Gentleman with the hat here.
Make it a hard one.
And then finally, can anyone name 2 different actresses who, and there's been more than 2, that played Wonder Woman? Your hand went up first. All right, you got it.
What about Kathy Lee Crosby?
I know. Someone wanted to go deep.
What character did Deborah Winger play?
Wonder Woman. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming out. Thanks to Philip Tan, Aaron Lopriesti, and Jill Thompson.
Thank you.